Hello, my name is Patrycja Rozwora, and you're listening to Kitchen Conversations. This podcast aims to open up the mysterious and vague Eastern Bloc to a broader audience. For each episode, I'm inviting one artist or researcher, and together we explore their relation, interest, and the urgency to create within the framework of the post-Soviet sphere. Here, I also wanted to thank everyone for listening and supporting this podcast. It's very rewarding to see that with every episode, the community is growing, which was, of course, the whole point of this platform. If you're a regular listener, you might want to check out my Patreon page, where you can support my work and help me develop this amazing but time-consuming project. You can do that on patreon.com/kitchenconversations. For today's episode, I met Pavlo Borshchenko, a Ukrainian photographer originally from a provincial city of Sumy in northeast Ukraine and for many years based in Kiev. Due to uncertainties connected to the ongoing war in Ukraine, he decided to continue his life in Warsaw and moved there with his wife. On an everyday basis, Pavlo is working in the field of computer science, but since early age, he also creates astonishing photographs that were since shown in many international exhibitions and magazines. The first camera Pavlo owned was an old Soviet film camera. Despite its fairly poor quality, in comparison to today's digital equipment, Pavlo was great in using the manual focus and different lenses, which quickly assigned him the function of a school trip photographer. His impoverished environment was impressed by his skills and allowed him to shoot on an everyday basis. During his first university year, he was finally able to afford his first digital camera and started exploring street photography. However, the small city of Sumy didn't provide so many opportunities for interesting or inspiring sceneries due to its size and rather dull everyday. Therefore, Pavlo always looked forward to 2 city holidays that made people celebrate outside and thus allowed him to bring his photography to a next level.
One of them, it was a city day when a lot of people was on the street and some celebrations, some festivals and so on. So it was the time when I can shoot something interesting. And another day it was the Victory Day that now have something like bad meaning and bad smelling of the Russian aggression. But at that time it was still popular.
The 9th of May, right?
Yes. It's even before the Georgia, and at that time no one understand how bad it can be.
I was curious to hear more about Sumy and Pavlo's inspirations with his home. As it turned out, the city had 2 major historic periods that decided over its development. The first one was connected to sugar production during the times of the Russian Empire and still before the revolution.
Short history introduction. The city has had 2 major periods, and first of all it's sugar time, when in Russian Empire started to produce a lot of sugar, and Sumy region was one of them where a lot of sugar was produced, and in Sumy there was the biggest sugar plant.
That period brought to the city economic and social prosperity. Hospitals and orphanages were built, and even a military academy. All this translated into a big population growth, from 10,000 to almost 20 and even 30,000 people. For the next 50 years, due to the outbreak of the Second World War, the city was left as it was. Only after the end of the Second World War, under the Soviet regime, a big nitrogen chemical plant was built there and for a while made this region an industrial one again. After the fall of the Soviet Union, as many other small Ukrainian cities and other Eastern European ones, Sumy was left alone, depriving most of the population of chances for a better, more prosperous life. What is the situation now in the city in relation to the war?
The same as in Ukraine, in other cities. So basically, this city was in something like occupation, but enemy is not maybe something like put their forces inside the city. So it was on Circle Road near the city. It was in nearest village, but they somehow decided not to go inside. I think they have just task to go to the Kiev, and they just go through the city, and that's for now. I don't know but my parents still live here, and they don't want to move any other. So after the war started, my mother evacuated with my sister to the Europe, but my father declined that possibility because they don't want to. So basically, during his life, not to travel much, and that's why it's a lot of stress.
After a while, his mom and sister returned to Ukraine, whereas he and his wife decided to move to Warsaw, as the life in Ukraine became too unpredictable. Due to problems with energy and constant cutouts, it is hard to perform any type of everyday tasks. With the approaching winter temperatures, people are generally worried about how will they heat their homes. In some smaller places, like Sumy for example, the government decided to save energy by switching off street lights, which makes it gloomy and depressing, especially when the sun sets already at 4 p.m. But coming back to his journey towards art, at some point, in search of new opportunities, Pavlo moved to Kiev. In a big city, one thing you might need is a car. Pavlo was convinced that buying a better camera would allow him to do better pictures and earn some money for a new car. The task of becoming a good photographer proved to be slightly more difficult, which eventually brought him to enroll into a photography school.
When I bought a new camera, it doesn't happen. I decided to go to the photo school, and it's the first decision how my practice, how it looks like now. So basically I visited Viktor Marushchenko photo school, which is one of the best in the city, but he now died, and it's a big drama for Ukrainian photography, because we don't have for now, even before the war, good education in photography at all. He maybe changed my focus from technical perspective, from cameras to the image itself. And so the big shifting, and from this shifting, from make my home task and this course, I maybe put my something like photography career and something like that. So what I have before, it's just a hobby or something like, not a hobby, but it's not so interesting to talk about.
We continue our conversation by speaking about his connection to art. I know that Pavlo is a software engineer and has a, so to speak, proper day job along his artistic practice. I'm curious to hear more about it. How does he combine mathematics, physics, and art?
In childhood, I visited a lot of something like sections. What we have from Soviet times, something like this pioneers' houses where all these courses exist.
We call it, like in Poland, Dom Kultury.
In our city, we have 3 different directions. In this Dom Kultury, it's one of them. And here are something like artistics or something dancers, singers, and so on. So it's not my part. Other part, it was something like house of young technic people.
For Pavlo, the most interesting was wood carving and courses in radio technology, where young people were able to put together a radio, which naturally also combined physics and mathematics. Other courses he enjoyed was making stuff out of clay. His sister, on the other hand, took part in more physical activities connected to dance and acrobatics. Those early day courses really stuck with Pavlo, and the craftsmanship and the love for it acquired back then can be definitely seen in his current photographic series.
What's continued to be exist now, that I like to create all this stuff, and basically this work by hands to create masks or something like to develop some objects. It's what I started from the childhood. It was interesting for me. So basically, maybe it's more interesting than the photography itself. So photography is something like finalizing this process to make something like a productionized for for the stuff that it's just for fun.
Yeah, indeed, like the end product is photography, but like you create this whole kind of installation setups with a lot of elements and a lot of props and different clothing, which all is very specific. So I understand that you create all those elements by yourself. Do you build like these little planes and cars which appear then in your photographs?
Yeah, and I also very like the something like constructor, with Soviet constructor from aluminium, where you can put it's something like per Lego stuff, but it's more connected to the real life because you also use the same bolts. And this creation from different parts, and maybe creation from objects that not eligible for creation from the beginning. The result of the 19th, where we don't have the ability to have a good new or something like up to date, up to time.
Indeed, yeah, a lot of had to be self-made because there was just not good materials around, so people had to get creative. And yeah, now when you say it like this, I definitely see that in your work. It has this like self-made, handmade, creative solutions. If you look at Pavlo's photographs, you can indeed see how many props and objects he uses there. Fur hats, trench coats, tablecloths, curtains, carpets, helmets, instruments, toys, all taken from another time, all stained with a Soviet trauma.
Firstly, it was the house of my grandparents, this village. It's also because of their trauma of Holodomor and Soviet deficit. They collected a lot of stuff that will be something prepared for future, for example. That's why all these clothes is basically from this house. But after that, my wife showed me a later summer house, but it's now in Kiev. And his grandfather also collected a lot of stuff, and he also has this problem, for example, and he collect even something like a garbage and put it to home, and something like built from this broken windows, created some garden house, fry something like tomatoes and so on. And that's why this dacha also was filled up with a lot of stuff. But it's a little bit different time frame. So my grandparents, they I think 10 or even 15 years older than she is, and that's why they have a stuff that belongs to 60s. And Margot's grandparents have a stuff that belongs to 70s.
The first few portraits Pavlo took that later turned into a specific photography style and setup portraying the, as he calls, Sovietness, started by photographing his sister. It was Easter, 2 years after the passing of his mother. Him and his family visited the countryside house where his grandparents used to live and found boxes with handmade clothes belonging to his grandmother. Fascinated by the flowery textiles, Pavlo asked his sister to wear those clothes and photographed her.
Firstly, it was something like a simulation of that time, and now I understand that I filmed not a simulation, but something like a powerful of woman in context of Ukrainian beings. That's why. So basically, from my also experience, all this life in village was organized by my grandmother, and that's why this something like family history. It was before this project of Sumy. So Sumy project, it's already some others shifting for. Switching from something like simulation of the time to just images that not belong to the time, out of place. So it's not connected to the place itself and to the village. It's something like connected to the territory and the region, but not a concrete village or concrete house.
Later on, he started photographing himself as well as using his close friends as models. Most of his photographs consist of very simple compositions with a specific background and objects on or around the model. What's important is the mood and system the picture represents. I was curious to hear why on a lot of Pavlo's photos the models have covered faces.
It's not about the person, it's obvious because I just use the image as something like image itself. It's not a history of, not about some description of the person. So that's why most of these photos it's three people, and out of three people it's one of them is myself.
You're on the cover of KAJET Journal, one of your works from the series Sumy, Sorrow of My Days. And I thought that we could briefly speak about or analyze the photo which is now on the cover of the magazine. It's called Air Force. Why did you decide to use those specific elements? So on this photo we see a female figure in a pink plane.
The prototype of this plane was a horror that originated in Russia and now attacking Ukraine. So basically, I look at the picture from this victory parade of decorated children's carriages to tanks, some planes, and so on, and I decided to put it to something like artist context, because for me it was the very powerful part of cargo cult. Basically, I asked my father to help and he creates this plane. Basically, the color, I think it's also not created intentionally, because as I remember, this color just left from painting our walls in a Walls house, and there are some amount of this color exists, and my father just used it. I decided that it's okay, it's a good color. And
the cover photo originates from the second shooting session with the cardboard plane. In Pavlo's series, Air Force, we can also see other compositions with the pink plane, where he himself wears the plane and walks around in circles to simulate a military training. For the cover of KAJET Journal, he again chooses to work with his sister, metaphorically speaking about Ukrainian women and the model of a matriarchal society.
For example, in my cases, my grandfather, he has some drama at the end of his life, and when I was born, he basically was not so powerful to make any decision and just live without any ability to vote to any decision, and so just my grandmother decided everything. That's how I understand the rules, how this house lives. And my sister is something like a connection between two generations. So basically, my sister in this all the clothes and this all the stuff, there's something like add a vitality to empty place. And also she is very good model because didn't ask any questions why it, and they just waiting for the advice what she should do, and didn't change anything in the beginning. So I have a time to think, to something like change the lenses, to take a look from different perspectives, and so she's a very great model.
The use of so many Soviet symbols and literal objects of that time might be understood as nostalgic. I was curious to hear what role does nostalgia play in Pavlo's work. He told me that the nostalgia might relate to his childhood times that were, of course, stained by the Soviet history. The objects he uses, be it inherited, bought, or found, are the only physical elements that connect his generation to the generation of his grandparents, who simply do not follow the quickly changing world and are in some way stuck in the past.
So, for example, when we cancel a Soviet, we don't have background for 17 years, and it's empty space. So how we should We don't have, for example, a lot of families don't have pre-Soviet tradition, and they died with. So Soviet destroyed some older tradition, and now we destroyed Soviet, so we don't have something like the connections between generations.
Pavlo shares with me anecdotes from the life of his grandparents. Already before the Second World War, they used to make their own clothes, towels, and so on. Till this day, Pavlo's family is using those textiles since they are still in good condition. From his childhood, he remembers watching a black and white TV in his grandparents' house. They got so used to living under specific conditions that even despite possibilities of living differently, it was hard for them to adjust and change their habits.
They have the black and white TV, and all their life they use black and white TV. And in my childhood, it was a black and white TV. And after that, for example, it was something like a short period where it was colored, and after that it started a flat and big dimension. So it's dramatically changed. A lot of such experience. So this it's connected to the Soviet symbols. It's other part. It's something like social political dimensions.
Some of Pavlo's photos include direct symbols of the Soviet propaganda machine: the hammer and the sickle emblem, a red star, or a bust of Lenin. Pavel laughs that it's not like those objects are laying around his grandparents' home. But with those, he wants to visually explore the past that for some was not only representing an oppressive, totalitarian system, but stood for the rights to free education, a social house, and a proper pension.
Our family was not so political. They think in terms of Soviet propaganda, in terms of why it's bad. Anyone can have education, anyone can have work, and anyone can have pension. In the village, there are one red flag, and we don't have Lenin objects in our houses.
I wanted to come back to Pavlo's motivations to create. Did he only create those images to find a link to older generations in Ukraine and those living in his region, Sumy? I was still wondering, how does he combine his day job as a data analyst with creating such particular and thoroughly researched images of the past regime?
I think the main motivation is my interest. So basically it's something like opposite that what I do in my regular work. So basically I don't have this layer in work, and I maybe have it in my second work as a photographer, the art creation. So basically, it's something like my need to express yourself, and so I don't have any political ambitions, for example, to change society. I just show my view. This view, for example, can be specific because I have a specific background, and it can be a view of my generation, for example, because it's something like a generation in the middle between two systems, because I don't maybe live in Soviet, but I have a Soviet childhood because of a poor situation in 19th, and I don't have something like I don't have such influence of capitalism in my childhood, basically.
I just wanted to come back to the term Soviet and post-Soviet, because I think in this kind of post-colonial discourse, this term is like wanted to be, or people want to reject it or not use it anymore, because it kind of connects to this kind of traumatic past. But it's interesting that you say that if we don't use it, we kind of lose this whole history and this whole connection to all the generations which lived through this time.
I think we should not use it in terms of when we speaking about now, but we definitely need to use it in terms of when we speaking about the past. We need to think that it's not a modern term, it's something like a historical term. And when we think about it as a historical term, it's something like we make a mark that it's not a now, it was a past. I don't like the cancel culture at all, because it just as it totality something like system, like Soviet was, and we just cancel some term, but just acts as Soviet acts that cancel, for example, other
censorship,
culture.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, or just decided that this masterpiece is Russian, that it's not Ukrainian or something like that. And in terms of current war, Soviet time is just something like a form of a Russian empire that translated from monarchy time to something like Soviet time, and now we have other form of the same stuff. So my opinion that we need to maybe dive into details when we talk about it. And also this empire ambition from Russia and so on, they exist before the Soviet and still exist after the Soviet. So the Soviet is not the reason for this colonial myth and colonial stuff. So it's one part of it, one form of it, but not the maybe the reason of all our problems.
In his work, Pavlo speaks about the Sovietness in people, something similar to the theoretical Homo Sovieticus, a pejorative term for an average conformist person in the Soviet Union and other countries of the Eastern Bloc, a type of person that was created by the Soviet regime. Back then, people didn't have the chance to choose, thus developed a lack of responsibility for their actions. Pavlo claims that these people still exist in Ukraine, and there was not enough work being done to process those traumas and work with them as a nation.
One thing that I think still exists and from Soviet time, and something like a Sovietness people. It's something like this main set of Sovietness people that some others is response for the issues. Government is maybe responsible for life of their people, and so basically this put in responsibility to some others is one of the behaviors that developed hardly in Soviet time, when in totalitarian system all people don't have the ability to choose and to put their responsibility for their choice. And that's why this behavior still exists in Ukrainian society. And the most maybe dangerous things that we didn't, for example, put our influence to work with these behaviors. We just cancel the name Soviet and put that it's wrong, but we don't work with consequences. It's I think the biggest issue that we need to solve in Ukrainian society as well. Not to fight against history, but fight against the consequences of this history, and to understand why it happens and what we can do.
The thing I'm taking out of it is like the shortcuts of understanding history, and that we shouldn't be so easy about it, and to kind of go deeper into specific.
History is very difficult things because each government or each something like period of history wants to have their own history for the last other periods, and that's why we don't have any something like a real history in a time. It's not only about Russian propaganda. It's also something like it's difficult because we can't decouple history from propaganda itself, and from decouple history from current goals, current nationals or government goals, and history just is something like an instrument for achieve these goals, and that's why it's difficult to understand history as one of the truths. For me, interesting not so history, but this as I already mentioned, the society part. So it's something like society, history, politics, and so what's all about how the society lives and works.
Lastly, like with every guest of Kitchen Conversations, I asked Pavlo about his favorite home food.
Basically, I don't good at cooking, so I just like good foods, but I don't like cooking. From foods, it's so easy because my second name, something like have a good hint for what I like. So I like borscht.
All right, and I think the borscht got like added to the Ukrainian national heritage, right? I think recently. So that's
yes. I also like Wareniki.
Wareniki.
But, I like that one that steamed dumplings.
He said, however, that for him the Ukrainian food is too cooked and missed something fresh in it. He again recalled some traditional living of his grandparents who, due to energy savings, often switched off the fridge and kept the food outside, especially in winters. In summer, when butchering the pig, they used to marinate it in salt so it stays good for a longer time.
I remember my grandparents, they live without fridge, for example, and they salt the meat and something like have this salted meat that put it to salt, for example, in the winter when the pig was gutted. And they use it this meat in summer. Just put it to the water to put out this additional salt from it, and it's named something like solonina.
Thank you so much, Pavlo, for sharing. Yeah, I wish you a good start in your new city, and I'm curious where your work will develop. I think you are also showed your work now quite a lot, which is nice because I think people kind of they have an idea what kind of images you created. So the podcast will be a nice background to the visuals they already saw somewhere in places.
Thank you.
This was it for today. Thank you for reaching till the end of this episode. And as announced in my previous episode with Natalia, I also just released the Kitchen Conversations cookbook. It is an artist cookbook with recipes of 17 artists who were the first to appear on my podcast. As you know, I collect all these recipes, and the first ones made it into a publication published by Contemporary Links. Please check out the links in the show notes that will lead you to the book. And if you want to support me, you can buy it. You can also support my Patreon account, as mentioned at the beginning, where for a certain stage of supporting, you will also receive a book. In general, if you enjoyed my episode, my conversation with Pavlo and the podcast itself, I would love if you share it with anyone who might be interested in those topics in Eastern European art, because at the end of the day, it's all about growing our community. Thanks. Until next time.